Today we're going to review the first unit of the year about the creation of the United States of America. First, the colonies. The first permanent English settlement in North America was founded at Jamestown, Virginia. At first, many settlers died from disease and starvation. However, new settlers arrived and began to grow tobacco, a Native American crop that proved to be profitable for the colonists. In the beginning, the colonists in Virginia used indentured servants to work their plantations. By the late 1600s, however, planters had switched to slave labor from Africa. The other southern colonies were very similar to Virginia. Plantations in Maryland, the Carolinas, and Georgia used slaves to grow export crops that were sent back to England. All of these colonies also supported the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, as the official tax-supported religion. Two exceptions were Maryland and Georgia. Maryland was founded by Lord Baltimore as a haven for persecuted Catholics. Georgia was founded by George Oglethorpe as a haven for persecuted debtors. A different group of people settled farther north. Religious dissenters, Puritans, had argued that the Church of England was too close to Roman Catholic beliefs. A large body of Puritans decided to move to the American colonies. They first moved to Massachusetts with approximately 1,000 settlers, but soon that number increased to 20,000. The Puritans created a society based on religious laws and democratic political activity. Even though the Puritans immigrated to the colonies to escape religious persecution, they tolerated no dissent from their views. A minister named Roger Williams preached that the settlers should buy, not take, land from the Native Americans and should tolerate religious diversity. Facing arrest from the Puritan leaders, Williams fled to Narragansett Bay, where he started a new colony called Rhode Island. This colony had no established religion, instead practicing separation of church and state. The Dutch, not the English, were the first to settle New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. These colonies were very diverse, with people from many different nations, including the Dutch, English, Irish, Scottish, German, Jews, and African slaves. The area west of Delaware became the colony of Pennsylvania, founded by William Penn. Penn was a member of a religious group called Quakers who were persecuted for their beliefs. He hoped to create a home for Quakers in his new colony that allowed freedom of worship and included an elected government. Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware all practiced separation of church and state. Unlike New York, which had the Church of England or the Anglican Church as the established religion. During the colonial period, two movements profoundly affected the course of American history. First, the Enlightenment, an intellectual movement of Europe, taught colonists to value reason, science, and liberty. John Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau, and Beccaria all influenced key political leaders who embraced new ideas about democracy, checks and balances, and civil liberties. The First Great Awakening was a religious movement that led many colonists to challenge the authority of the established churches. New churches were created, evangelical churches, other than the Puritan and Anglican institutions that had existed since the beginning of the colonies. Both the Enlightenment and the First Great Awakening led the colonists to question traditional authority. Revolution and a new nation. By the mid-1700s, conflict between Great Britain and the American colonies grew over issues of taxation, representation, and liberty. The colonies had enjoyed a great measure of self-rule, forming colonial assemblies that created their own economic policies. However, beginning in 1765, the British Parliament decided to levy new taxes on the colonies, provoking a rebellion. Colonists boycotted British goods, tormented tax collectors, and even organized protests, like the Boston Tea Party. Angry at taxation without representation, the American Revolution began in 1776, after the Declaration of Independence was written. After winning the Revolution, the new states faced another challenge, forming a new government. American leaders feared a true democracy that would give power to the uneducated masses. They preferred a republic in which people rule through elected representatives. The first American Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, created a republic But it ended up a failure. The national government didn't have enough authority over each individual state. In order to solve these problems, key American leaders met together in 1787 in Philadelphia to write a new constitution. The delegates at the Constitutional Convention had to make many compromises to resolve fundamental disagreements about how the new government should be structured. The delegates first debated two plans for representation in the new government. The Virginia plan favored large states by calling for 2 houses of Congress based on proportional representation. Smaller states favored the New Jersey plan that gave each state an equal vote in 1 house of Congress. The Great Compromise, as it came to be known, made 2 houses of Congress. In the lower house, or the House of Representatives, representation would be based on size and delegates elected by popular vote. In the upper house, or the Senate, each state would have the same number of members. Next, the delegates debated whether slaves should be included in the population count. The northern states with few slaves believed they should not. The southern states with many slaves favored the idea. The delegates again compromised, agreeing to count 3/5 of the slaves when determining the number of representatives in Congress. When the United States Constitution was finally drafted, the delegates had created a republic based on federalism, checks and balances, and the separation of powers. To change the Constitution, there was an amendment process. In order to ratify the new Constitution, the people of each state had to vote to approve the document. Opponents of the new Constitution demanded a Bill of Rights to be added, which eventually was in 1781. The Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, are basic civil liberties that all Americans enjoy. They include the freedom of speech and religion, the right to bear arms, and the rights of the accused. Preserving the Union. In the next 50 years between the American Revolution and the Civil War, the new nation faced many challenges. The first issue that created tension in American politics was the debate between federalism and states' rights. Some American leaders believed that the states should have more power to make decisions for themselves, while others believed that the central government should become more powerful. For the most part, the Federalists were more successful in increasing the power of the national government. First of all, the Federalists succeeded in creating a Bank of the United States, which increased the economic power of the federal government. Second, in the Whiskey Rebellion, the Federalists asserted the authority of the government to tax. In the Supreme Court case of John Marshall, Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court asserted its authority to decide whether laws passed were constitutional or not. In response, states' rights advocates embraced the idea of nullification, the concept that a state can ignore a law they feel is unfair or unconstitutional. The second issue that created tensions in American society was religious diversity. A renewal of religious sentiment, known as the Second Great Awakening, inspired a host of reform movements. Preachers told their audiences that each person could change themselves and others. Spurred by these religious and reformist ideas, the abolitionism movement was born. Abolitionists sought to end slavery, causing great fear in the South. Furthermore, a new religious group was born in the Second Great Awakening, the Mormons. Facing persecution in the East, the Mormons, led by Brigham Young and Joseph Smith, moved west to Utah to create a new territory. The third issue that created conflict in American politics was the sectional tension between North and South. The two regions of the United States had dramatically different economies. The North was based on industry with free labor, and the South was based on agriculture with slave labor. At first, the North and South just disagreed over tariffs. The North supported tariffs because they protected big business, while the South condemned tariffs because they increased the prices for imported goods. But soon the conflict spread to the essential controversy, slavery. As America purchased or conquered more land in the West, great debates emerged over whether the new territories would be slave or free. Eventually, the Civil War began over this very issue. Reconstruction and its effects. With the North's victory over the South in the Civil War, the federal government affirmed its dominance over the states. However, efforts to ensure rights for the freed slaves proved much more difficult. From 1865 to 1877, a period known as Reconstruction, the federal government passed many pieces of legislation to resolve the legacy of slavery. The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery. The 14th Amendment ensured equality. And the 15th Amendment assured the right to vote. However, the Southerners fought all efforts to help the freedmen and created a terrorist group, the Ku Klux Klan, to intimidate blacks. After the Compromise of 1877, the period of Reconstruction was over, and the era of Jim Crow began. All throughout the South, public facilities were segregated and laws restricted blacks' right to vote. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses effectively disenfranchised African Americans for the next 100 years.